Hello, YouTube. So today I'm going to give you 5 tips to get your bench press up as a dunker or hooper that deals with elbow, shoulder, or wrist issues. So the 5 tips I'm going to go over are proper form, easing into weights, proper warm up, listening to your body, and frequency. So first and foremost, I'm going to provide the sources of the information that I got this from. So first, I'd like to shout out my coaches, John Evans, Isaiah Rivera, and Austin Burke at THP Strength. Taught me a lot about proper programming and just a lot of other things. And the second, I would like to shout out Tom Barnes and Austin Young with JumpX. They pretty much always preach doing upper body, especially if you're trying to get your vertical up. And they kind of made me think about it more since like I kind of was neglecting it for a little while. And third, I got this through just through trial and error, working with myself, seeing what worked for me. So this is stuff that worked for me, but I think it can apply to other people as well. So I'll just jump right in. I probably started bench pressing before I was even into vertical jump training, so probably about 2016. Um, and at the time, I didn't understand the proper form that you're supposed to use when you're benching. I would just grab the bar and push it forward, not really thinking about it. And I did that for about 3 or 4 months, and I got to like a 135 pound bench like pretty quick. And then by the time I was repping 135 pounds, which was like still in 2016, like over the summer, I started getting really bad like shoulder pain, to where I couldn't even like actually this was the winter, so I kept benching in the summer and was fine, but when I got to the winter break in like my sophomore year of college, I started having really bad shoulder pain to where I couldn't even bench without pain. And that came down to one, me just having bad like shoulder sockets, like just bad like just the way I'm built is just not good for shoulder movements. And then two was like bad form. I don't have any footage of how I benched during this time specifically, but the first thing with proper form of the bench press is to retract your scapula. So you want to set your shoulder blades into a position where they're protected. So basically you go up, back, and down, and it'll create a small little arch in your lower back when you're laying flat on the bench. But the important thing about that is that it'll protect your rotator cuffs and all that stuff, so you won't be going all shoulder. It'll be nice in a set position when you're pushing. And then number two, or second tip, would be easing into the weights. So I'll show you a clip here. Let me share my screen. So this was in 2017, and I was about 160 pounds, and this is 190. And this is one other thing that I didn't really mention, but you can see in that clip that I am pretty much benching very wide, which is okay. But I think for me personally, that grip kind of puts a lot more strain on my shoulder. So I've moved to a more in between wide and narrow, so somewhere in between there for me, just because I can move the most weight and it doesn't give me any issues. So anyway, back into tip number two, easing into the weights. So in that time period, when I was 160 pounds and doing 190 pounds for one rep max, I was pretty much doing insane volume on bench press. I was doing upwards of like 10 to 12 sets of bench, just benching a lot, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I was doing this with pretty heavy loads than what I was used to. I pretty much just maxed out, and then I would try and get like an extra rep. So it'd be very close to my max. So like 90 to 95% of my max I was trying to do for 1 to 3 or like 2 to 3 reps. Like I was trying to get an extra rep, which is very taxing on the body when you haven't worked up to that. I never did any like proper volume or anything like that. I just kind of jumped into that. And basically I spun my wheels from 2017 until about 2021. I was just spinning my wheels. I would push really, really hard, then I would get like elbow and shoulder like issues, and then I would stop. it would go away, and then I would do the same thing. So I just ended up not making no progress in like a 5 year time frame from about until about 2021 when I kind of learned how to train to get your bench up, but I'll explain. So third tip I would give is doing a proper warm up. So basically in 2022, I switched programming. It was similar to what I was doing in 2017, but less at a lighter weight. So I would go for as many reps as I can at a certain percentage. It was usually like at most 70%, and I would just try and push for as many reps as I can. And that got me stronger, but it was a lot of volume and I wasn't warming up properly at all during this time. I would just jump, do the bar, do nothing. So my basically, if you don't, for some people, their scapula has trouble like moving in and out. Like when you're going like that, it doesn't track properly. So if you're not warming those up before you bench press, you may be doing a little too much shoulder, even if you're setting the scapula, or it's just harder for you to get into the good position and maintain it. So basically, what I would do now that changed from back then to warm up is getting one of these bands. And basically, what you would do, I can't really fully do it here, but you would bring it up over and basically do dislocations, like coming back and around. And another thing I would do is kind of go one side like that and then switch. And then another thing I added is you would sit not on these kind, but the bands with the handles, sit on one of those and get it so you can have it in a, a W position behind your head and push up into a Y. And that really is really, really good for warming up the scapula. So I was doing none of that in 2022, but I made huge gains. So I'll show you this clip here. So this was my first 225-pound bench press after 5 years. So this took me a long time and it really should not have, but here you go. Here's the clip. You can see I'm really making sure to set up here. And my grip is a lot more narrow than back in 2017. And it moved really well. And this is the hype at the end. It's pretty funny because it took me so long to reach that. All right. Back to stop share. So from that, I made a lot of gains, but tip four would be listening to my body or listening to your body, I should say. So in 2022, I kept benching and eventually got to a point where my wrists were really bothering me. So instead of like backing off in the weight, I wanted to keep pushing. So I used wrist wraps, which I don't think are necessarily a bad thing to use. Like if you accidentally, let's say like you kind of messed up your wrist and you need to still train, it's great to use. But my issue here is that I was so focused on upper body, like it was almost as important as dunking was to me as vertical jump training. In reality, it should have been second. It shouldn't have been important at all. If I had an overuse injury, I should have just, rested, gone lighter, not really care too much. Like it's not gonna make or break your vertical jump how much you can bench. Like as long as you're doing some upper body work and not like completely going way too light and you're getting some good like volume in, doesn't really matter. So I did not listen to this at all. So this was a slow burn over time. So I'll show you the first clip I need to share before I do that. All right. So this was after a couple months of training after that 225. This is 245. Really, really had to grind for this one. I'm pretty good at doing that. So that was good. As you can see, I had the wrist wraps because my wrist really bothering me, but it wasn't too bad at this time. So I was kind of ignoring it. And then let me stop sharing screen. So after that, I kept pushing it 2022. And then I started getting, some elbow issues, which was like, oh, like that's not good. So I did some research, and I found these elbow sleeves that actually really helped. Like I didn't feel any elbow pain when I put them on because it would really warm them up because you got all that heat there. But it's not a long-term fix, it's more of a short-term thing. So I just kept doing that. And then I actually got pretty strong doing this. And another thing, back to the point of not making it a main focus, I was gaining a lot of weight during this time because I was injured, so I couldn't jump. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna like focus on upper body, which is okay, but I really should have limit how much I gained during that time. I should have tried to like stay the same weight, but regardless, this is what I did. In the very end of 2022 with the elbow sleeves and the wrist reps. This is 245 again, big pause, and it moves pretty easy. This is probably my peak of strength at this specific time, probably in my life. But to be fair, I was like 212 pounds, so it's like not really ideal for jumping. Um, so anyway, I'm not going to rant too much on this point. So basically, listen to your body. It's not shouldn't be it should be in your program, but it should not be a main focus. If you have an elbow or shoulder or knee like ache, should probably cut back on the volume of upper body and let that recover you because it'll affect your dunking like pretty bad. Like there's been periods of times when I messed up my shoulder real bad to where I could barely jump. Jumping was hurting it, like doing that full arm swing. So if you're feeling anything like small aches and pains from upper body training, definitely cut back. It's okay. You can come back to it later. Like it's not gonna go away. It'll always be there, but it's important, but not a main focus. And my last tip would probably be frequency. So one thing I was doing with that when I was using the elbow sleeves near the end of 2022 was I was benching two times two times a week, which is pretty much like two is a lot. I would say like you shouldn't even be thinking about three unless you're really like really durable. Like two times is really a lot. So that was another thing. I wasn't quite managing the load when I was doing it two times a week. I was doing it two times a week, but I was pushing it a little too hard on that second day. So I would recommend having one day where ideally you would work up to this. You would start pretty light, but you would have workout where you go a little heavier. Maybe for me, for example, I was doing 80%, 8 sets of 2, with like 2 minute rest. And that was pretty heavy for my heavy day. And then instead of doing traditional volume for the second upper body day of the week, I was doing a 5x5 with like maybe 70% of my max. And that's just a way to build some extra volume without going too crazy. So you kind of got to manage the volume when you're doing higher frequency. You know, you want a lot, but you don't want to go overboard to where you're not recovering or you're dunking and that other stuff. And then the end result of all these tips I gave you is this 250-pound bench press after I'd lost 15 pounds. And this was just from pushing intensity really hard, but also managing the fatigue I was putting on my body. So there you go.